In this lecture, I will guide you to code the update user function of the user module in the Xiaomi admin application. In the user listing page, the admin user can click the edit button to edit the details of a specific user, and the edit user form appears like this, allowing the admin to edit the details such as email, first name, last name, password, roles, assignment, and enable status similar to the create new user form. And note that we won't code the user photos upload as it will be covered in a separate lecture. And click the save button to proceed the details of the user into the database, or click the cancel button to go back to the user listing page. Note that in edit mode, the password field is not required. It is blank, empty by default, and you can see the placeholder text leave blank if you don't want to change password. So if the admin wants to change the user password, he can enter the new password into the password field here, or leave blank to keep the password unchanged. When the button edit user is clicked, and if no user was found with the given ID, a message should be displayed like this: could not find any user with the given ID. And after the user details has been updated, the successful message appears. The user has been saved successfully, same as creating new user. So in Java code, we need to implement the edit user method to handle the request to edit a user coming from the user listing page, and the edit user method in the user controller class. We call the get method in the user service class, which in turn invokes the find by ID method in the user repository interface to retrieve a user based on an ID. If no user is found with the given ID, the get method will throw the exception user not found exception. If a user is found with the given ID, it will show the edit form in the user form page. And we also need to update the is email unique method in the user service class for checking the uniqueness of user email in edit mode, and update the save method that persists the user details into the database. For coding the edit function, we need to update the edit hyperlink in the user's listing page, and code the edit user method in the user controller class, and implement the get method in the user service class, and update the user form page. And for coding the update function, we need to update the save method in the user service class to change the user password if not blank, and update the is email unique method in the user service class for checking the uniqueness of user email in edit mode. Now let's coding. Open the user's HTML file here, and we need to edit the hyperlink for the edit user button here. We use timelift th:/sref, and the URL is /users/edit/ and plus the ID of the user.id, and the title of the link is edit this user. Okay, and refresh the user listing page, and you can see the title of the edit button is edit this user here. Click here to edit the user name Haming, and you can see the URL is user/edit/ and the ID of the user being updated, and we see the white label error page because we haven't implemented the handler method yet. Okay, then we need to update the user controller class to implement a handler method for editing a user here, user controller, and we need to implement a new handler method with the get mapping annotation, and the URL is here /user/edit here, with a placeholder for the ID value of the user being edited, public string edit user. And in Spring MVC, we can map the value here in the URL by using this annotation, path variable here with the name is ID, and then a variable name integer ID. And in this handler method, we return the logical view name to the user form, user_form. And here we need to retrieve user object by ID. So we need to call the service get and pass the user ID. This method returns the user object. So click here to implement get method in the user service class. Okay, you see. And here we simply return user repo file by ID method. Spring Data API already provides the file by ID method that returns an object by ID here, and this method returns an option of type t. So here we need to get the actual value get, and this method can throw a no suck element exception. So we need to try catch this statement, catch no suck element exception, and we throw a new exception, throw new user not found exception, which the message is could not find any user with ID plus ID, and we need to create this custom exception, create class user not found exception, finish, and we need to generate a constructor from superclass that takes a string. So right click source, generate constructor from superclass, and choose a constructor that takes the string here. Okay. And add throws declaration for this get method. Very simple, right? And here in the handler method, we need to try catch this call to the get method of the user service class. Try catch user not found exception. Here. And if the user not found exception is thrown in this code, we need to display the error message. The message like this: could not find any user with the given ID in the user listing page. So we need to use the redirect attributes here. So copy and paste here the redirect attributes. So we can set the message when redirecting. Add flash attribute like this. Here the message is the exception message here. Simply pass the exception get message here. The message is here: could not find any user with ID. If a user object is found, then we set it onto the model. So we need to have reference to Spring MVC model here, model, and put the user object onto the model. Add an attribute user, and open the user form here. You can see in the form we have the object name is user here. Okay, and move the code, return user form here, and here we return a direct in case of exception to the user listing page here. Okay, save the changes. Okay, and let me try to edit the user Nam Ha Minh here. Click the edit button here, and you can see the details of the user Nam Ha Minh appears in the form here. And also we need to update the title of the page here to edit user, with the ID here. You see, edit user and followed by the ID of user being edited. So in the user form here, we need to update the page title. You can see the title is fixed text here, so we need to parameterize this. So we use TimeLeap to print the value of the variable name page title, and also update the page title here right after manage users here. Then in the controller class we set the page title variable here. In new create new user here we need to set the page title attribute. Add attribute page title is create new user. In create new user mode, and in edit mode we set the page title is edit user, and followed by the ID plus ID here. Okay, save the changes and test edit user again. Refresh this form, and you can see the title is now updated to edit user here. Edit user with ID here. Cancel and create new user. You can see the title is create new user here. Cancel. And let me try to click the edit button on the user Ravi Kumar here, and you can see the user ID is 3 now, with the details, email, first name and last name get displayed on the form here. You can notice the rows of the user is not displayed, so we need to update the code in the handler method here to retrieve a list of rows. Similarly in the new user method here, so we will need to copy this statement and we add the list rows onto model here. Okay, save the change and try to edit the user Nam Ha Minh with the row admin here, and you can see a list of rows get displayed here, and the row admin is checked here with the blue check mark here. Perfect, right? So we can see it is very easy when using Spring MVC with TimeLeap. And now let me try to edit the user Anna Maria with the rows salesperson and editor. And you can see the rows salesperson and editor are checked here. Perfect, right? And let's test the case that the user ID is not found. For example, I click edit the user Dennis McCain here with the ID 4. Somehow the ID in the URL is 44 here. Hit enter, and you can see the message could not find any user with ID 44. Perfect, right? It's because in the exception here we redirect to the user listing page with the attribute is exception message here. Next, we need to update the email unique in the user service class for checking the uniqueness of user email in edit mode. Also update the user form in edit mode for the exact call to the RESTful web service on the server. Okay, and open the user form here, and in edit mode we need to have a hidden field that stores the user ID here. So we specify input type equal hidden here, and with the field name is th field, refers to the ID field of the user object here. And also in the JavaScript code that makes exact call here, we also need to pass the user ID as parameters of the post request here. So here we need to specify ID. We get the user ID here, user ID equal the query selector for the ID field value, and then pass the user ID here, user ID. Okay, save the changes and refresh the edit user form, edit user Nam Ha Minh here, view page source, and you can see in the form the hidden field ID here that stores the ID of the user being edited here, and the JavaScript code gets updated as well here. Then in the user service class is email unique method, we need to add the user ID as additional parameter for the method, integer ID here, and also we need to update the user REST controller class here, because now the is email unique method requires 2 parameters, and in the method signature here we also need to declare an additional parameter for the user ID, param user ID, integer ID, and we pass the ID here. Okay, save the changes, and because in the JavaScript code Ajax core it passes the user ID here along with email and CSRF token. Then we need to update the is email unique method here to process the case that existing user is being edited here. Okay, let's update the code here. If the user by email is null, then we return true in this method because no user is found with the given email, meaning that the email is unique will be unique in the database. And we check for the case that the user is being edited. Boolean is creating new equal to the expression ID equal null. If ID is no, meaning that the form is in new mode. Otherwise, if ID is not null, that means the user is being edited. So then we check if is creating new user here, and if the user by email is not null, then we return false. Because in create new user mode, the user by email is not null, meaning that there's already another user having this email, so the uniqueness of email is false. Else in edit mode here, this else block for the edit user mode here, we check that the ID of the user by email here, get ID is different than the passed ID from the method parameter here. If the ID of the user found by email is different than the ID of the user being edited, that means the email is not unique. So here we return false. And lastly, at the end of the method here we return true. That's it for the is email unique method. And for testing purpose of checking uniqueness of email, we just disable the form submission here. So here we comment this line form submit here. Now let's test editing user listing page, and now I'm trying to edit user Nam Ha Minh, and I will change the email to the user Ravi, and it should display a warning message. Click edit, and I update email of this user to the email of another user, and click the save button, and a warning message should be displayed. Sorry for the password field, we need to update, so it is not required in edit mode. You see, we got the warning message. There is another user having the email Ravi here. So far so good, right? Now let me change the email to a different one, and it should not display the warning message. Click save, and you see nothing happens because we disable the form submission here. That means the email is unique. Click cancel, and we test the case create new user, and we enter an email which is not exist in the database. For example, maria222@hotmail.com. Here, this email is not in the database. Maria Zikir. Yeah. And when click the save button here, it should not display any warning message because the email is unique. Click save. Click save again, and you can see nothing happens because the email is unique. If I change the email here to ravi@gmail.com, it should display a warning message. You see, there is another user having the email Ravi. Yeah, perfect, right? So that the checking logic for uniqueness of user email is working properly in both cases, in creating a new user and in editing an existing user. Now we need to process the case that the password field in edit mode is not required. If the admin wants to change the user password, he can enter the new password here. Otherwise, leave the field blank to keep the password remains unchanged. Okay, so we need to update the user form first here in the password field here. Password field here, and we need to use timeleaf if condition here. This password field is required here, and we use the timeleaf th if with the condition is the user ID is null, meaning that it is creating a new user. Otherwise, if the user ID is not null here, then the field is not required because the user is in editing mode. Min length and mask length is still required, but the required attribute is not needed. Okay, save the changes and let's test edit username Haiming here and click save, and you can see nothing happens, and you see the password field is not required. But if I want to change the password, if I enter just 3 characters here, the minimum length and maximum length constraint here still working. Click save, and you can see please lengthen this text to 8 characters or more here. Perfect, right? And we need to test the create new user again to make sure that the password is required in create new user mode. Enter email here, John Doe, and password here, leave blank. Click save. You see, please fill out this field. Perfect, right? That means password is required in create new user mode, but it is optional in editing mode here. You see. Then on the server side, we need to update the save method in the user service class here to process the case that the user is being edited with a new password or not here. So here we need to have a boolean value to check the is updating user or not equal to the result of the expression user get ID equal null or not. If it is, sorry, it should be not null. If the ID of the user is not null, that means it is in updating mode. So here we check this flag if is updating user, and else is in a new mode. Here, of course, finally we proceed the details of the user in edit mode, updating mode. we need to retrieve the user details from the database to check the password. User existing user equal to user repo file by ID here, and passing the ID user get ID and get here, and then we check if the password on the form is empty or not. If user get password is empty here. If the password on the form is empty, meaning that the admin wants to keep the user's password unchanged in the database. So here, because in the form we don't store the user password, so here we need to read the password from the database and set to the user object. So here we set user set password, which is a password from the existing user. Get password. Else, if the password in the user form is not empty, then we encode the user password. Encode user password here. User. That's it for the logic of the save method in the user service class, and save the changes. Now we are ready to test the update user function. Here, users, and I want to edit the username Haming. Click edit, and for this user I just want to change the roles here to add the roles salesperson, editor, and assistant to this user, and other fields remain unchanged. And in the database you can see the password of user Nam Haming is Nam2020 here, and I click the save button. Sorry, I need to uncomment the line that submit the form here. And refresh the edit user form again. And I want to assign the roles salesperson, editor, and shipper for this user, and click save. And you can see the message the user has been saved successfully, and you can see the roles of the user Nam Haming updated to salesperson, editor, and shipper here. And let me check the database, and you can see the password of the user Nam Haming remains unchanged. Perfect, right? And the second case, I want to update the password of the user Ravi here. You see currently the password is in plain text, and I edit and I change the password of this user Ravi to Ravi 2021, and click the save button. Save successfully. And let me check the database, and you can see the password of the user Ravi is now encoded in the database here. Perfect, right? And let me edit the user Dennis Maken here to modify all the details from email to first name, last name, password, and roles. Here, user Maken, I change the email to user Maken. That's it. And first name Dennis, and last name is McCarthy. Password is Dennis 2020, and the roles are changed to salesperson and assistant here, and enable status to false. Click save. User saved successfully, and you can see the user Dennis McCain here. First name update to Dennis McCarthy, salesperson assistant, and enable status is false here. And let me check the database. User Dennis here, password here, refresh, and you can see now first name and last name got changed here, and also password updated here. Perfect, right? And we'll also need to test create new user again, because the logic in the save method has changed. So here I'm going to test create a new user with email already exists in the database here. First name is Mohammed, last name Zuri, password, and the roles is just admin. Click save, and I got the warning message. There is another user having the email here. close and I change the email to mohammed2021@gmail.com and click save. Perfect, right? You see the user Mohammed got persisted here with the row admin here. And let me check the database. You see the user Mohammed here, password encoded here.